Have you ever had a moment that made your skin crawl? A shadow where there shouldn't be one? A whisper in an empty room, or something you simply can't explain? If so, we want to hear from you. Here at the Haunted UK podcast, we're always on the lookout for spine-tingling stories to feature in our end-of-season listener episodes and our short haunt series. Whether it's a chilling encounter, a mysterious experience, or something that's haunted you for years, we want your tale. Send your story to contact us at hauntedukpodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media: Facebook, X at Haunted UK Pod, TikTok and Instagram at Haunted UK Podcast, or visit our website www.hauntedukpodcast.com. Now, if you love what we do and want even more haunted goodies, then you can support the show on Patreon and Ko-fi. We've got 2 brilliant tiers, Possessed and Spooked, both packed with bonus content, exclusive episodes, and extra material that'll keep you up all night. But that's not all. We've launched a brand new sister podcast, Haunted UK Fiction, and we're calling all storytellers. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for spinning eerie tales, we're looking for original fictional short stories and novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Think suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. Submit your story to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com and follow us on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. So whether it's truth or fiction, if it's haunted, we want it. Now, sit back and enjoy the episode. Quebec is known as one of the most historically and culturally rich provinces in Canada. Its culture is one filled to the brim with folklore and legends, to the point where there are books dedicated entirely to traditional French-Canadian fairy tales and lore. These stories intertwine the influences to both early French settlers and the Native American tribes that populated the region. Most of the legends were kept alive by raconteurs, the French-Canadian equivalent of bards or minstrels, who would use oral storytelling traditions to keep both their people's history and culture alive and pass on warnings about the consequences of moral failings, such as greed or selfishness. These tales spread throughout the land as the raconteurs travelled the region, spreading stories that would often feature religious undertones, such as deals with the devil and the dire consequences that ensued, to keep morality, superstition, and obedience at the forefront of the burgeoning population's minds. Many of these stories are still familiar to the current population of Quebec and continue to be told to this very day. In this episode, we'll explore the legends, mysteries and the lore of the French-Canadian province of Quebec, from tales of a flying canoe, deals with the devil, and the many ghosts left behind by the battles between the French and the English. The stories are as varied as they are numerous. The most famous legend hailing from Quebec is that of Le Chasse-Galerie, which sees a group of lumberjacks make a deal with the devil on a fateful New Year's Eve night. The story is said to have occurred in the Outaouais region in the mid-1800s. Just before midnight, on the 31st of December, the lumberjacks were getting ready to celebrate the new year. The camp's chef had prepared the réveillon, a traditional late-night feast meant to carry the festivities through the wee hours of the morning, and the camp's director had given the group a barrel of rum. At this time of year, Quebec was particularly cold, especially in the remote areas where these men did their work. The chef, having had a few too many drinks, was stretched out on his bed sleeping when his colleague Baptiste shook him awake to ask if he wanted to go and visit his lady friend Lise. "Lise?" exclaimed the chef, confused. "That's impossible. She lives nearly 400 kilometers away near Montreal. It would take us over a month to get there on foot in all of this snow." "We're not going on foot," replied Baptiste excitedly. "We'll be traveling by canoe. In the air. We'll go to the village ball and be back at camp by 6 a.m. tomorrow." "Ah, I see," said the chef. "You're asking me to run the chasse-galerie, to risk my eternal soul to go kiss my girlfriend in the village. Yes, exactly. And we need an even number of men to do it. You'll be the 8th. The chef leaned back a moment before replying, "I'm a bit drunk and not very religious, but selling my soul to the devil? Blimey. Don't be such a scaredy cat. There's no danger. With the flying canoe, we'll travel at 200 kilometers per hour. All we need to do is not say the Lord's name and not hit the bell towers and the steeples of the churches as we go. It's simple," explained Baptiste. "Yes, but we have to pledge loyalty to the devil," the chef pointed out. "A simple formality. If we bite our tongues and drive the canoe well, we'll be back at camp on time and we won't have any problems," argued Baptiste. Without giving it any further thought, the chef made his way to the canoe. Baptiste warned the men not to drink at the ball to ensure they could see clearly when driving the canoe back to camp. He then stood behind the canoe and said, "Repeat after me. Satan, we promise to deliver our souls to you if, within the next 6 hours, we pronounce the name of our master and yours, the good Lord, and if we touch a cross during our voyage. With this agreement in place, we ask you to take us over the mountains and then return us to camp." The men solemnly repeated Baptiste's words, and the canoe lifted off the ground. To their amazement, it rose higher and higher, up to 600 feet in the air, then launched like an arrow, flying faster than a gust of wind. The men saw the winding rivers and valleys below and quickly reached their destination. "Get ready, we're going to land," shouted Baptiste, over the whooshing sound of the air around them. 5 minutes later, they were in the village inquiring about the location of the ball. Upon seeing the men, the town's inhabitants expressed surprise. "Let us dance, we will tell you about our voyage in the morning," Baptiste said to them. It was now 2 a.m., and the men, having found the location of the party, danced for a couple of hours. Baptiste, failing at keeping his word, drank a few glasses of whiskey. Before they knew it, it was time for the men to leave. They quietly escaped back to the canoe without drawing any attention to themselves, the chef not even kissing his girlfriend goodbye. Despite being a bit drunk, Baptiste took the lead in guiding the canoe back toward the camp. He mistakenly made a wrong turn, and the canoe brushed against the bell tower at Contrecoeur and nearly ran into the cross at the top of the mount in Belloy. The other men held their breath, knowing that hitting a cross would mean immediately surrendering their souls to the devil. To get back on the right path, Baptiste turned the canoe so quickly that it went crashing into the snow on Mount Royal, at the center of Montreal. The moment his feet hit the ground, Baptiste began to curse. The men once again held their breath. If he carried on cursing like this once they were back in the canoe, it would be eternal damnation for them all. The men huddled, and it was decided that they would bound and gag Baptiste before getting back in the canoe and flying toward camp. They were almost at their destination when Baptiste managed to free himself from the gag and launched a series of curses at them. The canoe immediately went tumbling out of the sky. Luckily, it landed on the branches of a giant pine tree, breaking the fall for the men, who then landed in the softness of the forest snow. The chef lost consciousness and found himself back in his bed, his hands covered in scratches when he woke. The other men at the camp told him they found him, Baptiste, and 6 of their colleagues in a snowbank next to a barrel of rum. The travellers never spoke of their voyage, too ashamed of having almost sold their souls to the devil for the simple exchange of a New Year's kiss from their lady friends. The pattern in Quebecois legends is evident that, like in many cultures, tales and lore are often used for the purpose of teaching lessons or reminding community members of the importance of following rules and social conventions. In this vein, we move on to the bonhomme 7 heures, which translates to the 7 o'clock man. This character, with roots in the New France era of Quebec's history, was still widely used a few short decades ago as a deterrent to children with a tendency to linger outside after dark. Some believe the name of this entity may have been derived from the English term bone setter, a term used for someone, often unqualified, who would reset broken or dislocated bones, often leaving their patient with misshapen or deformed body parts. The creature is said to steal children who linger outdoors after dark, catching them with one hand and tossing them into his burlap sack. The descriptions of the creature vary, but generally it is said to resemble a slim, tall old man with a long, crooked nose, sometimes dressed as a vagabond with dirty hair and a long black beard. Though somewhat human in appearance, bonhomme 7 heures is not considered human, but rather evil or even demonic in nature. He is said to live either in a cave in the mountains or in a remote hut in the forest, making his way to towns and villages in search of children lingering outside after dark. Like the Wendigo, some versions of the tale paint the creature as having an insatiable appetite for fresh, young human flesh, going so far as to leave the gnawed bones of disobedient children strewn about his home. There are parallels to draw with other tales that came across the Atlantic with early French settlers. In this case, the legend of Croque-Mitaine, an ogre with a taste for young children, or its Anglo-Saxon counterpart, the bogeyman, a character used by parents to keep their children obedient and safe from wandering out after dark. In the Quebec metropolitan area of Montreal, an Irish variant of the story threatens disobedient children with a figure called Headless Mary. It is easy to brush these stories off as centuries-old tales from a bygone era, but their effect persists to this day. A quick online search yields modern-day witness accounts of encountering terrifying creatures after dark, some of which are eerily similar in description to the cast of characters mentioned above. Perhaps this is a testament to the effectiveness of using these stories to keep children in line, and the lingering effects they have on the subconscious. Moving on from terrifying creatures but keeping with the theme of curses and deals with the devil, the very real history of the Quebec Bridge is as terrifying as it is tragic. During its construction in the early 1900s, the original bridge collapsed twice due to design flaws, resulting in the deaths of 88 workers. The first collapse was by far the worst, killing 75 of the 86 workers on site that day. The bridge then continued to experience challenges until its completion. Of course, where there is mass tragedy, there are tales and lore. In this case, the legend says that after the second collapse, a mysterious man who claimed to be an engineer offered to help with the construction of the cursed bridge. He promised there would be no more accidents. However, in exchange for his services, the first being to cross the bridge would have to sell him their soul. The foreman didn't pay much mind to the last part of the man's sales pitch. Desperate to finish the project and move on from this now tainted reputation, he readily agreed. In Quebec, it is widely believed that the legend's mysterious man was the devil himself. The bridge was completed in 1917, but it would be 2 more years before it was used. It opened to much fanfare and ceremony in 1919, with many notable figures in attendance, including the Prince of Wales. Of course, the entire crew of workers and engineers were also present, including the mysterious man, who approached the foreman with a terrifying gleam in his eye. It was in this moment that the foreman recalled his conversation with the stranger and the deal that was made. Coincidentally, a stray cat happened to stroll by at the time. The foreman quickly sent the cat across the bridge before any of the people in attendance had an opportunity, thereby circumventing the worst possible outcome of the agreement. Canada is known worldwide as being a French-English bilingual country. Whilst there are still some tensions between cultures, these are nothing compared to the confrontation that occurred on the Plains of Abraham, forever changing the course of Canada's history. Recognized as one of the bloodiest battles in North American history, thousands of soldiers, the British under the direction of Major General James Wolfe, and the French led by Lieutenant General Marquis de Montcalm, shed blood on the battlefield in 1759. In the nearly 300 years since the battle took place, the Plains of Abraham has maintained a reputation for being heavily haunted. Adding to the turmoil, the battlefield became a site for executions and, due to its somewhat remote location keeping it hidden from view, the area later became ripe with prostitution, illegal duels, and crimes. Nearly 200 men lost their lives, and hundreds, if not thousands more, were injured or maimed in the infamous battle. Victims included both Generals Wolfe and Montcalm, who lost their lives each fighting for their cause, Wolfe never being able to claim his victory over the French. Visitors to the site have reported ghostly soldiers patrolling the entrance to the barracks. Others claim to hear the sound of cannon fire and notice the smell of sulfur in the air surrounding them. The battlefield is now a lovely, expansive city park with cycling paths, picnic tables, and vast grounds where the Quebec City Summer Festival is held annually, making it easy, despite the remaining wartime structures, to push its tragic past to the back of people's minds. Perhaps the ghosts are reliving their untimely ends, or perhaps they are simply wanting to be remembered. Montreal is often cited as being the most haunted city in Canada, with over 500 documented paranormal accounts. Chateau Ramsay has been deemed as one of the most haunted locations in all of North America. Originally built in 1705 as the residence of Claude de Ramsay, who was then governor of New France, the estate included an orchard, garden, and the primary residence, a 66-foot-long stone structure that was 3 stories tall. After Ramsay's death in 1724, his family sold the property to a fur trading company who transformed it into a shop and warehouse to store its pelts. In the decades that followed, Chateau Ramsay changed hands several times until 1775, when American soldiers seized the building after invading Montreal and used it as their Continental Army headquarters. Benjamin Franklin tried his best to convince the city to join the newly formed United States of America, but local residents stood firm against the idea. The following year, British soldiers sent as reinforcements were able to push the Americans out of the city. The British governor then took up residence in the chateau. Chateau Ramsay became a medical building associated with Laval University, now known as the University of Montreal, in 1878. It is well documented that many patients died within the walls of the chateau, likely contributing to its haunted reputation. Interesting to note, it was during this era that Oscar Wilde visited the estate's gardens during one of his lecture tours. As the story goes, these gardens were the inspiration behind his children's story, The Selfish Giant. In 1895, Chateau Ramsay was converted into a museum by an antiquarian society to save it from demolition. Curators selected a wide variety of paintings, coins, documents, weapons, indigenous artifacts, and other curiosities to preserve and display in the museum. From the outside, its lush gardens and beautiful stone facade don't betray the museum's haunted reputation. But let's take a dive inside. Reports of hauntings come from both tourists and staff and range from disembodied footsteps, moans coming from the fireplace, to full-body apparitions in period clothing which suddenly vanish into thin air. Staff claim to hear loud wailing or crying, or their names being called when no one else is in the building. They've seen furniture flung across the room, paintings falling off the wall, and objects moving of their own accord. One of the more disturbing occurrences is that of ghosts sitting in chairs, with shocked staff and visitors watching in real time as the cushions flatten beneath an invisible body. One staff member even managed to photograph a blurry ghost in a picture taken during one of his shifts. The image is on display within the museum. There are several theories regarding who exactly is haunting Chateau Ramsay that range from a former guard who remains on duty watching over the museum's artifacts to a former warden named Anna O'Dowd. Anna was said to be very meticulous in the upkeep of both the museum, its grounds, and her on-site living space. One of the ways she would relax after a long day of perfectionism was to take a hot bath in her top-floor flat above the museum. One day, staff arrived for their shifts, only to find Anna was not there to greet them and give them direction for the day as was customary. They went up to her flat and, getting no response after knocking, cautiously entered. To their horror, they found Anna's body floating in the bathtub. No cause of death was ever found, with the primary theory being that she simply suffered a heart attack while taking a bath. It is widely believed her ghost remains at the museum, critiquing the displays she can no longer oversee. Whoever or whatever lingers on the premises, museum management notes, without denying the location's haunted reputation, that the entity or entities at Chateau Ramsay do not seem malevolent. They simply make people feel fear. We move on to a strange tale memorialized in a Quebec City newspaper clipping from the 12th of July, 1869. The term revenant, derived from a French word which roughly translates to returned, is often used to describe the living dead. In this curious account, members of the Saint-Roch community near Quebec City claimed that one of their own, Monseigneur Edmond, a local carpenter who had recently passed away, had spent that Thursday afternoon and evening throwing sand and dirt at neighbouring houses before escalating and throwing blood in the face of a young girl who was hanging laundry outside. Perhaps most frightening is that the revenant was invisible. Authorities and journalists flocked to the site to record first-hand accounts. Understandably, there was a lot of fear-mongering, with residents bringing up lore common at the time, such as loup-garou, which is Quebec's version of the werewolf, devils, witchcraft, and revenants. Eventually, police sent everyone home, certain that the entire incident was simply imagined. However, the lingering question remains. How is it that so many people reported the same incident in such a relatively short window of time? In all the time that has passed, none of the witnesses are alive today, so it's safe to say we'll never truly know what happened, unless one of them returns to tell the tale. The Charlevoix region of Quebec is known for being steeped in tradition and folklore. From stories of haunted locations to legends of werewolves, the people of the area have many tales to tell. One tale hails from the quaint riverside town of Saint-Irénée, where a young woman named Gabrielle spent her teenage years from 1940 to 1950. The story begins when Gabrielle is sent to live with her two aunts after her parents conclude they don't have the means to provide for their many children. The aunts, who lived in a house that still exists today, were nicknamed les tortes, the French-Canadian word for pigeon, because their black outfits reminded locals of the dark birds. The sisters were very religious, spending all day praying, attending every local church service without fail, and carrying their rosaries on them everywhere they went. Gabrielle, who was not religious, found her living situation with her aunts rather challenging. she refused to attend church or pray with them and found herself drastically unhappy living in their home. It was shortly after her arrival that rumours began circulating about Gabrielle. Word around the village was that she wasn't quite normal. As with any small town, the rumours spread and grew like wildfire. Suddenly, witnesses were claiming that strange noises such as scratching and rattling chains would occur when Gabrielle was present. Another neighbour claimed she saw a pound of butter lift into the air and fly into a window of its own accord. Another stated a pillow levitated off the bed and moved itself out of his reach as if by magic. Hearing the stories circulating about their niece, Gabrielle's aunts became convinced she was possessed by the devil. As was customary in such a situation, the village priest was called to their home. He took the situation very seriously, informing the diocese that a young woman was possessed. The diocese sent additional priests to help him in his quest to banish the devil from Gabrielle and from his town. Over the course of 2 years, strange manifestations continued to occur. Furniture would be moved by unseen hands. The aunts' rosaries would be thrown across the room or sometimes disappear altogether. A vicar was sent to perform exorcism prayers against the devil and try to bring Gabrielle into the fold, but he was unsuccessful. Eventually, Gabrielle was sent to live in a different home within the limits of the village, and over the next 6 months, no unexplained phenomena occurred. Shortly thereafter, she met a handsome stranger who was said to have a very polished appearance and charming ways. The two married and were never seen again in the Charlevoix region. Some claimed the man was the devil come to collect Gabrielle. Others believed the man was simply well educated and that he whisked his bride away to the big city where there were more opportunities for him. Whatever the case, Gabrielle's departure spelled the end of any supernatural events in the aunt's house in the village of Saint-Irénée. In northern Quebec, an eerie lake was discovered in 1870 with hundreds of skeletons on its shores, earning it the name Lake of the Tombs. According to modern-day research, a pox epidemic in the 1850s eradicated the indigenous population that had settled by the lake. Tales from the lumberjacks and trappers working in the area at the time are hair-raising. The lake shore is said to be haunted by the spirits of the dead, with several accounts of the skeletons rising from the mud to gather and execute a cryptic traditional dance. Still furious at having died prematurely and blaming European settlers for bringing this illness upon them, the ghastly skeletons perform a ceremony to request that the great spirits of nature punish the invaders. There is one particular tale of a group of lumberjacks and trappers making their way to the lake to debunk the legend, only for none of them to return from the expedition. Among them was a colossal man named Saint Amar, who had a reputation for being fearless. His body was found burned in a small forest cabin near the lake. His ever-loyal dog was by his side, keeping watch over his master's body, but the poor animal had to be put down as it was said to have gone mad, attacking trees and running in circles non-stop. The skeletons remain on the shores of the Lake of the Tombs, even to this day, sunken into the mud, patiently waiting to be avenged. Witness accounts about them are less frequent now, but old hunters familiar with the area remember what younger generations seem to have forgotten. Better to avoid the shores of this cursed lake, where the ancient spirits still boil with thirst for vengeance. Whilst in the forest, one might want to keep an eye out for yet another terrifying creature of law, the Jacques Mistigris. These nocturnal forest dwellers come out in groups, jumping, rolling, and moving their skeletal-type bodies in unsettling ways, cracking as they contort into grotesque and sometimes obscene positions, sometimes walking on their hands or even slithering along the ground. Their yelps and loud cries can be heard bouncing off the trees as they tumble through the woods. Jacques Mistigris come in all shapes and sizes, with some being described as very small, whilst others easily dwarf an average human. The bodies of these half-human, half-animal creatures are said to sometimes be lumpy or twisted, with some having horns and others having mismatched body parts from various animals such as caribou, snakes, and birds. One defining feature of these creatures is the putrid smell of their breath, which can be detected from a significant distance. This serves as a warning to people and animals in the forest, which is, in part, why eyewitness accounts of the Jacques Mystery are so rare. Most people tend to escape the moment their putrid fragrance catches the wind. Others, who don't heed the warning, are swiftly eaten by the creatures, but those who do manage to escape claim they are haunted by terrible nightmares about the horrifying creatures for the rest of their lives. From the horror of Jacques Mystery to a folkloric creature of charm and beauty, Quebec also boasts a few sirens in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence River. As the story goes, the young sirens accidentally diverged from their elders whilst travelling toward their home in the Red Sea and are now trapped near Quebec's Madeleine Islands. Described as is typical with the head and body of a beautiful woman and the tail of a fish, the sirens are said to approach fishing boats, hopeful that a kind captain will guide them back to their home. Their song is also said to have the same intoxicating softness and their movements the same polarizing grace as their ocean counterparts. Some witnesses describe their skin as being silver like the skin of a fish, and their hair covered in a fine dusting of gold when kissed by the sun. One sailor claims a siren climbed aboard the bridge of his boat and begged one of his fishermen to use his pocket knife to remove the bloodsuckers that had attached themselves to her tail. The young fisherman instantly fell hopelessly in love with the siren and, forgetting his wife and children, threw himself in the water behind the creature as she swam back into the depths. The fisherman was never seen again. Sirens aren't the only water creatures populating the folk tales of Quebec. The province also has its share of lake monsters. Arguably the most famous of the province's monsters is Memfray, who allegedly resides in a lake called Memfray-Magog in Quebec's eastern townships. The first recorded sighting of an aquatic monster in Quebec was in this lake in 1816. However, First Nations people told stories of an anaconda-like creature hiding in the water long before that. The stories they told served as a warning not to approach the shores should the monster surface to attack. Since then, there have been over 200 documented accounts of monster sightings in the lake. Descriptions vary slightly, but generally depict a long serpent resembling an underwater dragon or dinosaur. Is it possible that something prehistoric has survived all this time hidden in the lake's shadowy depths? Like all lake monsters, it's hard to know for sure. 500 miles away, in a lake called Poenigamuk, another creature haunts the imaginations of local inhabitants. Nicknamed Ponic, the beast is said to look somewhat like an overturned canoe covered in scales with a hairless crest down the middle of its back. Whilst several theories have risen to explain away the creature, such as a sturgeon, a sea serpent, or even old logs, the legend has lived on and thrived for centuries, and eyewitness accounts are numerous. First mentions of the creature date back to the 1800s. Then there was a lull in sightings until the 1950s, when a group of fishermen claimed to have seen a sea monster after nearby dynamite work had been done to build a road. Now, in a time of more modern journalism, their story spread like wildfire, and tourists flocked to the region to see if they too could catch a glimpse of the monster. The Minister of Fisheries even created a special permit to whoever could capture the beast, and a local newspaper offered a $100,000 reward to anyone who could provide a clear photograph. Visitors from all over the world made their way to the lake in an attempt to solve the mystery of Ponic the lake monster. The closest anyone got was a team of Japanese researchers using sonar, who caught a mass of approximately 8 meters in length pass below their motorboat. Accounts of the creature died down for several decades until the 1990s, when a resurgence of sightings revived interest in Ponic and the lake, whose name translates to the lake that mocks. Perhaps the monster is mocking the humans trying to divulge the secret of its existence, or perhaps it is the lake itself mocking and teasing them. We now move on to a tale of native lore that holds parallels to the story of the Great Flood told in Christian religions. The story begins toward the end of a very ordinary day, as the sun is setting behind a tall mountain. Suddenly, the village dogs begin to howl in unison, filling the surrounding air with their sound. The tribe's guardsman begins to call, "Here comes the only man across the great plain." Warriors saddle their horses in preparation for combat, whilst women, children, and seniors clamber to higher ground to witness the encounter. At the far end of the meadow appears an extraordinary being. Undoubtedly a man, he looks nothing like the tribespeople. He runs on two legs like they do, but his nearly naked body is covered in white clay, making him look as though his skin is bright white. On his head, he wears the carcasses of 2 crows, while 4 pelts taken from white wolves are draped over his shoulders. The man enters their encampment and makes his way to the chief's residence. "Who are you to have such an appearance? Don't you see you are frightening the dogs, the horses, and the children?" asks the chief. The creature responds, "I am the only man, and I bring you news." Reassured, the women and seniors draw closer, running their fingers over the man's skin to get a swipe of the clay that covers it. Clay is a sacred substance to them. The only man does not speak their language. However, they are able to understand him as the sounds coming out of his mouth are so melodic. The tribe's sorcerer then invites the only man to come to his hut, but he is swiftly refused. "I am a creature that has been accustomed to far more comfortable surroundings. I cannot sit in such a place. The hut smells badly and the ground is too hard." So the sorcerer calls the women to collect branches to make a broom and clean his hut. They then lay ferns on the ground to make it softer and hang fragrant plants and herbs on the wall to dispel the offensive odor. Once the work is done, the sorcerer asks the only man, "Will this suffice, or will you make us build you an entirely new home?" "This will suffice," replies the creature as he enters the hut. He smokes 3 pipes, then announces he can now proceed with his news. But first, he tells the tribespeople to collect human and bison skulls and to light a fire with oak wood while he goes for a walk, as he is not able to assist in these vile preparations. The tribespeople work through the night while the only man walks from hut to hut, calling each occupant to come out. The tribespeople ask him, "What do you want, stranger with the strange skin? Are you mad to inconvenience the people of our village in the middle of the night? You scare our children, and you worry our dogs and our horses." To this, the only man replies, "A terrible catastrophe has occurred on the other side of the mountain. Such rain has fallen that water covers the earth. I am the only man saved from the flood. A frog had granted me a warning of the cataclysm and convinced me to build a large canoe. It is thanks to this canoe that I was able to come to your village. Quickly, exit your huts and bring me your sharp tools, such as the one I used to build the great canoe. I shall sacrifice them to the water gods." All night, the tribespeople collect knives, axes, and spears and bring them to the sorcerer's hut. The next morning, the only man congregates the tribespeople in a circle around him and tells them, "I hope no one has refrained from placing their sharp tools into the sorcerer's hut. Even if one of you neglected my instructions, the flood will come over the mountain, and the water will drown your village with all of you in it." The tribespeople exclaim loudly that they have all followed his instructions and all sharp tools are in the sorcerer's hut. "Very well," says the only man as he grabs a branch and hands it to the sorcerer. "This olive branch will help you recall my words. I collected it on the other side of the mountain before the waters rose." The sorcerer carefully places the medicinal plant inside his hut. The only man continues, "I must leave now. Place on my back the sharp tools and weapons you brought for the sacrifice. I must go to the sea as quickly as possible to appease the elements. It takes the tribespeople several days to load all the objects onto the back of the only man, and by the time they are done, he is carrying a weight equivalent to that of 3 bison. The only man doesn't flinch, claiming he has the sap of a giant sequoia tree running through his veins. The man goes on his way, walking in a long, straight line across the plain until he disappears onto the horizon. It is at this point that the sorcerer exclaims, "The celebration is over, but we will celebrate again each year to commemorate the passage of the only man through our village." Since that day, the ceremony takes place and gives way to joyous festivities, because none of the tribespeople lied. They all contributed to the sacrifice, and the flood never breached the mountain. Their village was saved. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of this episode. But one thing is certain. Whether or not you believe any of these stories, if you find yourself ambling down one of Quebec City's cobblestone streets, having lunch on one of Montreal's many quaint restaurant patios, driving along the banks of the St. Lawrence River, or heading north into the interminable forests of La Belle Provence, be sure to keep a watchful eye on that charming, well-dressed stranger. Listen closely for loud yelps in the night, and whatever you do, don't stay out wandering the villages after dark, because the next person to be haunted abroad could be you.